Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Desi from Clean Air Partnership, and with me today is Gabi, also from Clean Air Partnership, and Jeff Ransom from Building Owners and Management Association, and Dave Ramsley from Open Tech. Before I give the word to them, I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. Clean Air Partnership is a Toronto-based organization, and we acknowledge that the stolen land on which we operate is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. At CAP, we recognize that many Indigenous peoples are particularly vulnerable to climate change and will be disproportionately impacted by its effects. Through our work, we are committed to disrupting ongoing approaches to climate governance that reproduce settler-colonial relations and systematically exclude Indigenous peoples from policymaking. I wanted to share a video with you so we can learn more about the Anishinaabe perception of time.
In a previous video, I had people asking me why I use the term 7 generations.
While I won't give away the significance of the number 7 because I want to encourage people to do a little bit of their own homework, I will talk about why the Anishinaabe talks so much about so many generations ahead.
You see, time works differently for the Anishinaabe. We're used to seeing time as past, present, and future in a linear fashion. For the Anishinaabe, sometimes the future dictates the past and the present, and the past dictates the present and the future. Our time looks like this.
So you see, us Anishinaabe people, we're visionary people. We don't like to just think about what's happening in the now. We like to think about the past and the future. But we're not just thinking about it. We're living it every day by thanking our ancestors for leaving behind what we have today. And we're constantly thinking about what we're going to leave behind for our future 7 generations. But don't worry, 7 generations isn't that crazy to think about. If you lived young enough to remember your great-grandparents and live old enough to remember your great-grandchildren, that's 7 generations. And our word in the Anishinaabe language for great-grandparent and great-grandchild, it's the same word.
How cool is that? And the word is, I'm going to try to pronounce it, is Aniko Bichikan. It's the word for great-grandparents and great-grandchildren, and it's a connective way of thinking cyclic rather than linear time. Moving on to our CAP resources. The Climate Action Atlas is a repository of ambitious municipal climate mitigation projects. And if your municipality has one, please share it with us. We will share a link to the Climate Atlas in the chat shortly. Lastly, our upcoming CAP events. On Friday, we have a workshop on applying an equity lens to active transportation. And on March 9th, we're gonna talk about the passive house design of one of the YWCA Hamilton's affordable housing. Without further ado, I'm giving the word to Jeff now. And give me a second, and I will share that presentation.
Okay, well, as he gets things set up, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us. Thanks to Desi and Gabby for having me here, and Dave, my colleague, who's joining us from Vancouver, for what I think is a pretty important conversation. And this is still also a early, somewhat early conversation for us, but a really timely one, looking at benchmarking, which is a topic I think a lot of us have talked about for many, many years, but is sort of going through a critical transition. And so today I want to look a little bit at what's been going on with benchmarking in Ontario currently, and thinking about benchmarking as a key tool for scaling up building decarbonization. That's sort of the key I think that we're all really interested in looking at, and why most of you are probably looking at decarbonization as well. Let's see, it's gonna move. Do you want to go forward, Des? Thanks. So BOMA Toronto's long been involved in building energy benchmarking, really, I think most notably through our Race2Reduce program, which is a program we launched about, well, a little over 10 years ago. We took over. We have been running this in the GTHA market We now have, if you want to jump ahead, so Race2Reduce has about 3,500 buildings who are now currently sharing voluntary building performance data through the Race2Reduce program. The Race2Reduce originally was a project of civic action, and it was really just about encouraging the practice of benchmarking and trying to mobilize this through voluntary efforts. And so we're really starting to normalize some of the standard practices of benchmarking. And over the years, the program's grown significantly as benchmarking has mainstreamed. It's a very sort of accessible program. It's free to participate for any property in Ontario. We use Energy Star Portfolio Manager as the backbone, which is a free tool provided by Enercan here in Canada. And so that's really what the program's been about. And then next slide does, we recognize each year we have an awards recognition program called the CREST Awards, which we give out to buildings in different categories based on achievement and conservation. And we mostly energy, but we also recognize water and waste conservation. We recognize climate leadership and innovation as well. And so this is a rewards program that BOMA Toronto delivers every year related to that. And put pretty simply, that's really what the Race2Reduce has been about, is about normalizing benchmarking practice and recognizing conservation leadership within the industry at a voluntary level. Next slide. Thanks. But I want to go back to the core principles of why we benchmark and why benchmarking is important. And it doesn't really matter who you are. Benchmarking is really about three key pieces, right? It's about collecting data, whether you're a building owner or portfolio, whether you're a city or a different partner, making sure that we can actually get the data that we need. It gives us the ability to compare property to property, either internally within your portfolio or across properties of similar types or across regions. And it lets us track, and it lets us track progress over time, right, in different sectors. So that's really what benchmarking is fundamentally. Next slide, please. And then for different stakeholders, there's really different value propositions, right? So for building owners, it's about market intelligence. It's about understanding how your properties are doing, how they're doing compared to your peers or your competitors within the marketplace or regionally. It's also about providing accountability. Once it is making sure that you're actually measuring performance and you're tracking it, building that discipline so that you know what's going on in your properties. That's a really key point for a lot of them. Is it's getting much better insight and helping to support their own KPIs around good property management internally. For the public sector, and that can be utilities or municipalities or government, provincial government, it's about broadly understanding what's happening in the market, being able to segment, understand the scale of impact of different sectors or different building types within the real estate sector, being able to do targeting, and that could be specific programs, understanding where should we be focusing our efforts based on priorities in the marketplace, or the ability to scale our impact more effectively. And it's about long-term planning. For the market, it's fundamentally an evaluation tool, and that could be either for tenants who are looking to locate in properties, for people making purchasing decisions to make more informed purchasing decisions, for investors to better understand the value of their assets relative to the rest of the market. So benchmarking can be a really important evaluation tool. Next slide, please. And so in Ontario, we've been doing benchmarking for quite a while. And, I'll sort of break it down. There's really sort of three sort of categories of benchmarking that we have right now. We have industry programs or voluntary programs, I'll say, programs like the Race2Reduce. There's a couple others out there, but these are largely sort of closed within a specific sector or a specific region and focused mostly on engagement with that market. We have the provincial's mandatory EWRB regulation, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, which rolls out this summer down to all buildings over 50,000 square feet need to report their data annually. And then we have municipalities now starting to get more actively involved in benchmarking, and we have programs like the City of Ottawa has rolled out their benchmarking program. And each of these programs is important for different reasons and is effective in different ways. The industry programs obviously are important because of some of the ability that we have to recognize, to share data, to be able to provide higher levels of engagement directly with the industry through the networks that we have in place. It also has limitations in that we're sort of connected largely to our core members. We don't really get out of our sector. So it's a bit of a fixed data set. On the provincial side, EWRB is an incredibly important piece of legislation, although not always for the reasons that we think. And so while it certainly does create a legal requirement for benchmarking, which has the opportunity to really move the needle across the market outside of just engaged properties to participate in benchmarking. The way the regulation is currently structured, there aren't maybe the carrots and sticks tied to it that one would hope to really drive uptake. We're still seeing relatively low awareness levels. And while it's provincial in scope, the data disclosure is not what it was sort of intended to be initially, I don't think. If you see in the Excel spreadsheet of the data available, it somewhat limits the utility of the benchmarking data to be adopted by different stakeholders to use it strategically for various uses, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, how you can really use benchmarking data. So it does have some limitations, but the real value of EWRB, besides just making it a requirement of all properties, is some of the other legal precedents that it provides. So because of EWRB, utilities are required to share tenant consumption data with building owners, which is critical if you want to have a benchmarking program. Access to data is a real barrier. So that legal requirement is incredibly important, not just for the mandatory provincial program, but for these voluntary programs as well, sort of ride off that. And then municipalities, obviously, they've got their own programs, and that's going to tie into what cities are doing in terms of trying to set regulatory targets or supporting measurement and verification of different programs that they have in their communities. So they all have a role, but there is a challenge with all of these programs out there in the market. Can you move forward? And this is really that we're starting to get into an environment where we're facing a lot of fragmentation and a lot of redundancy. And then we've got a whole lot of people who are thinking about the same thing and doing it in isolation. And for building owners, they're facing an environment where you could have a provincial program, maybe multiple municipal programs within your municipality, and various industry programs that you want to participate with, depending on the types of assets that you hold. Reporting burden is one of the biggest complaints that we get from our members in terms of, not just for benchmarking, but for certifications, for award programs, and, incentive programs. They're constantly being asked to provide data and report into different platforms for a variety of different reasons. And it's becoming overwhelming, and we're seeing a lot of them pull back, especially from those things that aren't required or mandatory. So we have to be aware of that as we start to add more programs. We're adding confusion, and we're starting to build up more resistance within the real estate community. Move forward. So the conversation today that I want to sort of kick off, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk a little bit about his experience out in British Columbia and the program that they're supporting, is to think about, as we are all moving towards developing benchmarking programs in Ontario, how do we make sure that we're leveraging all this data at the provincial scale, so we're not just stuck within our own little silos, that we're sharing resources and efforts, because we're all working on similar things. We should be able to leverage some of this work collectively and avoid some of the duplication of effort. How do we minimize the reporting requirements for the private sector and the public sector, frankly, so we don't have to track so many various different portals, programs, and places, and just what does that mean, and who is asking for what, and in what format? How do we maintain low barriers to entry for properties? And I didn't really touch on this, but scale, our big challenge for all of this is, how do we scale this up significantly? And even with voluntary programs like the Race, we have a lot of properties, but I would say they still skew towards more heavily invested real estate portfolios that are fairly sophisticated, are already bought into conservation and climate change. There's a lot of properties that we don't pick up. And I think with provincial regulations, there's a lot of non-participants, even with EWRB. And how do we get them engaged? We need programs that have very low barrier to entry, and so whether that's cost barriers or technology barriers to getting people engaged in this critical first step to kick them off down the road of decarbonization. And finally, how do we support regional consistency so that we aren't all doing it differently, but allowing some flexibility for different stakeholders to use benchmarking in ways that help to drive their goals and targets and obligations. So, that's kind of the big question. And we're sort of trying to work through this, and happy to have the opportunity to present to you, as municipalities who are probably yourselves thinking about benchmarking and how do you proceed down this path, get you thinking early about how we can start to work on more of a collective benchmarking program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk a little bit about building Benchmark BC, and that is a potential sort of vision or framework for what might be achievable in Ontario. Thanks.
Dave, while you're sharing your slide, can I just quickly run the one question now? I think it's a good time to throw a poll. I just wanted to ask you very quickly, at what stage are you at the discussion with your municipality regarding benchmarking and labeling? And I think that's going to give us a little bit more sense of where we are right now. And then Dave, you can take it away. Meanwhile, I'm just going to give 2 minutes for that.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Jeff. Great setup, and my thanks to the Clean Air Partnership, Desi and Gabby, for having us here today, and to all of you for attending. And I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations out here in British Columbia. I'm the co-founder of Open Technologies. We are a climate tech startup out here in Vancouver, and we work mostly with local governments, provincial governments on climate-related issues and solutions. I'm just moving my slide along here. Oh, maybe I can't move my slides while we're doing the. Oh, yes, we can. Okay. So I'm here to talk about Building Benchmark BC, which is a program that I started with some colleagues back in 2018, and may have some interesting potential transference out here in Ontario. So Building Benchmark BC actually is started by our sister, really technically our mother not-for-profit organization, the Open Green Building Society. The Open Green Building Society is a small not-for-profit that was started by some friends and I almost 15 years ago. OGBS, as it's commonly referred to, and some of the members on the board, refer to it as the original gangsters of building science. And really, by some members, I mean me and maybe one other board member, but maybe it'll catch on one of these days. But the OGBS was started to look at what are some technology solutions that can really leverage action in the sustainability and green building movement. So we got together back in about 2009 in some sustainability meetups, nerd jams and slams in a sustainability focused co-working space. And those of us working together actually started to think about how can we leverage technology solutions to around climate action, around green buildings. And so that's OGBS spun out Green Building Audio Tours, the Energy Pathfinder, and Smart Services applications. All these are applications that are still out there working today. And then we were also pretty successful in terms of winning some grants on some programmatic things. So working with Passive House Canada and the City of Vancouver, we ran the Icebox Challenge, which showed the performance of passive envelopes. We were the original host organization of the Zero Emissions Building Exchange, which was the precursor to our LC3 implementation, and then ran an advocacy campaign around step code adoption. So that brings us kind of fast forward to 2018 when the province of Ontario had adopted the EWRB legislation formally. I was the lead consultant on helping to develop that for both the city of Vancouver, or sorry, the city of Toronto and the province of Ontario. And the feds had made some funding available to government and not-for-profits that sought to see the expansion of use of Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We convened a group of local governments together and said, well, this is a great opportunity for us to apply for some funding, get a program started that would, bring building energy benchmarking at scale to British Columbia. And after lots of engagement with local partners, the hope was that the metro region would apply for the grant. The hope was at one point that the province would apply for the grant. And then when it came down to it, we basically were the last ones left standing at OGBS, where we said, okay, well, we'll apply for the grant and be kind of the host organization and work with you local governments to get a program going. And that's, I guess, the genesis of Building Benchmark BC. You can see the URL here up in the top left-hand corner. And I encourage you to check out the website, not just because it's germane to the topic today, but also we've just released our year 3 annual report on the program. I'm really proud of the team in developing this report. A lot of the slides you'll see here today have been taken from this. It's a fully digital dynamic report that it was built in Tableau, that allows you to kind of choose your own data adventure in terms of looking at the results. So every piece of data, every bar chart, every line graph is clickable, and you can search and query the data to your heart's content. So, and it's also got some really good, useful insights in it as well too. So I encourage you to check that out. But as I mentioned, the program started with 6 partner municipalities, mostly located in Metro Vancouver. We as OGBS started as a convening role in terms of we applied for the grant and then ran the program on behalf of the municipalities. We were then able to expand to 16 municipalities in our second year, and then in our third year, we actually transitioned to 21 partner municipalities throughout the province of British Columbia. The other really important thing about the program that has been developing over time as well too is we've moved from a completely grant-funded program in the first 2 years of the project, and in this year, we fully transitioned into a completely partner-funded organization, which speaks to the fact that the local governments who got involved, not only are more local governments joining in, but they actually now fund it with their own dollars and see the real value of the program, and have decided to continue it on now that the grant funding's expired. And every year we've almost doubled in terms of our building participation as well too. So we're going to try and target over 2,000 buildings in the program this year. Why am I not? There we go. So why do we do it? I think a lot of the same themes were coming up that Jeff is talking about. But at the time, I had just started working in commercial real estate. So I had left my consulting practice and was working for a national real estate company. And in my time consulting as a in developing benchmarking regulations, we heard loud and clear from industry that for these programs to be successful, there needed to be consistency for industry. So that if there were 6 programs in Metro Vancouver, they all couldn't have, say, 6 different size requirements for buildings or different reporting dates or maybe different ways of filing your information. That reporting had to be made simple for industry to embrace it. The other thing that we did was we wanted to, because back then benchmarking was relatively new, local governments were looking at implementing these programs, and we wanted to build capacity both for industry and for local government. So this was a very low barrier to entry for local governments to dip their toe into benchmarking, right? And to do it in a way where we were in the laboratory and they were behind safety glass, And we were able to implement the program, but they had like front row seats, and we're able to see, okay, where do we run into problems? How much labor, how much staff time, how much effort did it take to recruit buildings, to manage the data, to clean the data? So it really gave them firsthand experience in terms of if they wanted to transition to mandatory programs, that they already had the intel locally about how difficult or easy that might be. And what Jeff also talked about too is that there was an early recognition that by collaborating together, we could bring economies of scale and reduce the duplication of services, right? So, to put out a campaign, having that ready-made or collaborative brand, having one website, one help desk, not having 16 or 21 different duplicate sites or services. And finally, we really wanted to demonstrate that disclosure is not a big deal, that that industry was willing to not only participate in these benchmarking programs, but they were willing to disclose it publicly, which I know is actually still a factor in Ontario as well too. So what do we do in terms of like, what do we bring to the party? What's the program look like right now? So OGBS in this context, we coordinate the partners. So we run quarterly. Actually, we meet more frequently than quarterly, but we meet at a minimum 4 times a year. We meet more regularly around, say, partner recruitment time, or when we're about to release our reports. We lead the marketing and communications and the partner recruitment. So, providing coordinated materials. We actually have packages that we develop with a communications and marketing consultant that we then provide to our local governments, where they're provided with sample emails and brochures, and we even provide social media posts. So there is a whole partner recruitment kit that we work with the local governments on. We also work with the associations, so people like BOMA and others to really try to get recruitment happening. So that it's not just done off the side of a desk of some local government overworked employee. And then probably most importantly, we operate a help desk for participants. So it's been really crucial in terms of upping the industry capacity to respond. When we started this program, given that we were a voluntary program, we took data in any shape or form that people were willing to give it to us. So, whether those were spreadsheets, whether those were just exports from, platforms like Brightly or Measurable or others. And I think part of the success of the program is that with the support of our staff, we've been able to transition everybody into reporting now regularly into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. More than 95% of our data now comes in through Portfolio Manager. But we're able to work with those participants that if they have, say, like a proprietary dashboard that they're using, we have integrations that are able just to pull that data right in and make sure that reporting is as easy as possible for the private sector. This has also been really critical too in bringing in, I'm proud to say we have lots of representative buildings from the not-for-profit sector. So lots of low-income housing is in Building Benchmark BC. I think we have probably over 100 assets in low-income housing. And a big part of that has been able to provide that help and support to those lower capacity organizations. And then the other big thing, which I think is unique to our program in Canada, is we do a real high degree of QA, QC on the data. So we have a dedicated staff person that uses our software. So Grid is the platform that the program operates on. Grid has automated QA, QC, which flags suspicious values as billing data comes into the system. So these are very high values, very low values. And our staff actually follows up with when we get any of these flags to say, hey, it looks like you're missing some meters, looks like you may be, your building may be 1 million square feet, but it probably isn't. It's probably more like 100,000 square feet, or maybe you've included your parking, or just any of the litany of other common errors we see in benchmarking. So, we've really put a premium on being able to make sure that there's high quality data in the data set. We think we have probably one of the best data sets in the country with that regard. And then finally, at the end, we issue these annual reports and host the public website, which is all dynamic and searchable and on behalf of the partners. So what have been the benefits? You know, one of the things we're proud to say is we offer a world-class program. We think we offer one of the best benchmarking programs in the world at a fraction of the cost. So each one of our members contributes, I think this year, the fee is about $14,200 to the program. And for that, they get their help desk, they get the website, we get the analysis and annual report, all the recruitment. So, you know, typically, you know, the rule of thumb is you need 1 FTE for up to your first 1,000 buildings in a benchmarking program, right? And now this is, you know, we're able to offer the same high quality program for, you know, the township of Esquimalt as the city of Vancouver currently gets, or, you know, district of Saanich and the city of Surrey. So that's something that's been really good for the members. The other kind of added benefit, which we maybe didn't realize at the beginning, is that, you know, if the township of Saanich is just running a benchmarking program and they have 100 buildings, which is actually really good for Saanich, it doesn't give them as much insight as putting those 100 buildings in the context of the 1,500 buildings province-wide, where they can actually look at how their data set compares broadly to their peers. And this offers more value not only to the cities that participate, but also to the private sector participants that participate. And they're able to access a bigger brand that you know, is able to reach more property owners. So in the case of, you know, something like the Race2Reduce, Building Benchmark BC, I wouldn't even say has as much brand equity as the Race2Reduce does, which is a very established and well subscribed program. But it's bigger than anything any of these local governments could have done on their own. And then finally, something we didn't foresee but should have was, you know, people really like the co-learning from peers. We get great participation in all of our meetings. You know, any of the brick walls that we run into in terms of data collection, data quality, or which I'll talk about in a second, you know, we learn together. And then there's been this tremendous opportunity where we're starting to look at our data set and see areas of collaboration, right? So, you know, we have now over 50 fire halls as an example in our data set. And, you know, we're looking at running, you know, events with operations people from all of our partner municipalities and looking at, you know, what's the best performing fire hall we have here? What's the worst performing fire hall? Let's lock the doors and let's actually get those operations people together and say, you know, this is what the data is telling us. What are maybe some of the insights from operating and designing these buildings that we can learn from each other? And we can do that for pools, for ice rinks, for libraries, you know, for any of the social housing also too that we operate. So there's just a real benefit there, which we didn't foresee at the beginning. The other potential benefit or real benefit of working together is that these communities of practice that have evolved by looking at this kind of from more of a provincial context. And that's, you know, we've done a lot of work in convening unique ownership groups like health authorities and universities, for example. So both of these groups, I will concede, probably don't have a lot of interest from a regulatory perspective from you as maybe municipalities, local governments. But they have lots of really unique kind of unicorn buildings. Many of them are connected to district energy, and just getting those 4 health authorities in the province of British Columbia together and saying, okay, how do we treat seniors care homes and long-term care facilities? When does one become the other, or vice versa? How do we separate that? Getting them on the same page for that. Same thing with universities. How do we get the actual carbon intensity of those district energy systems that serve those campuses as well too, so we can be as accurate as possible? Because up until now, you know, we found that our health authorities in the province actually weren't talking to each other and didn't even know how each other's buildings were performing, and so that's been a great co-learning opportunity. The other thing that's been really great about this too is collective advocacy with the utilities. We've faced a lot of barriers and hurdles in terms of data access. And to be able to look at the data, collectively, see where the problems are, and then engage collectively with the utilities. We've actually had real measurable progress in dealing specifically with our natural gas utility to get them to work with us constructively on improving the data quality. And we see far less data errors now in year 3 than we did in year 1 that were arriving basically from omissions and data that were originating at the utilities. So I'll kind of hinge the presentation now. So, that's been sort of the collective benefit in terms of building the program to date, and what the individual local governments get out of it. And happy to answer questions too after this. But, we're also kind of seeing now that we're entering our 4th year that, just collecting data on its own isn't going to get us where we need to go in terms of climate action, right? There's good data out there to show that, and we see it in our data set too, that, just by collecting data, we see that 2 to 5% reduction generally just from people keeping score, right? But we now really need to see, okay, we've got 8 years here to go to have real impact on climate action. How are we going to use this data, and how are we going to, up our game based on this solid foundation? So we're focusing on now so what principles. So, each of our local governments gets this back-end dashboard, which, this is just an example of one page of it, but just allows them to slice and dice the data, in a way that they haven't been able to before, right? So search by property owner, by size, look at it over different years, get these histograms of, participation over the years and the average greenhouse gas emissions in those years. You're able to do that, look at all of these different things by different property sites or even by different ownership groups here as well too. You're also able to even able to do it based on geography and do different selections there as well too. So this is just an example of being able to, whoops, my mouse is being a bit oversensitive. Just looking at multifamily housing, for example, and just seeing, what that landscape looks like within the data set. And being able to see what the average GHGI is, for example, within multifamily housing. And then, this is actually taken directly out of the year 3 annual report, and get some interesting data insights whereby, we're seeing that, energy intensity is remaining relatively constant, but, the actual investments that both the utility is making in decarbonizing the electricity and potentially perhaps, starting to see lots of fuel switching and electrification projects taking hold, where we're actually really starting to see some measurable drops in greenhouse gas emissions that are unrelated to efficiency or lower energy use. So that's interesting to see. And based on some of this collective analysis, no surprise probably anybody on this call, but the key takeaways is that, we really have to start looking for tools and ways to switch as much thermal load away from natural gas to electricity as possible. And this is the same in Ontario as well too. So we're developing tools. This is an example of the scorecards that our participants get within the program. A lot of the data here is the same data that they would get just through Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but we also weather normalize the data, which is unique to our program. And then over here, we'll talk a little bit more about this now. We have analysis that takes the ESPM data, matches it to weather station data, and then through a regression analysis, we're actually able to provide estimates on end use loads. So how much of your energy is going to heating, cooling, domestic hot water, for example. And then what we're hoping to do here in year 4, which is also going to be a real value add to participants, is to be able to start to provide some virtual audits on this as well too. So what we'll be able to do here is, based on those weather normalized loads, forecast what the total peak load would be for, say, domestic hot water or for space heating, run that through a database of models, and then make recommendations on how they can electrify that load with air source heat pumps or air to water heat pumps, for example, and then provide some capital cost estimates on that. So this is going to be a big benefit for participants that we're hopefully will drive recruitment, but also lead to real climate action in the partner jurisdictions in which we're working in. So it's not, we're just moving on beyond keeping score now and really trying to drive action at the building level. And this is my last slide. I'm sorry if I've gone on a little long, but you know, other things that are upcoming in the next couple of years, we're looking at ongoing, how do we reduce friction in the process? So how do we you know, make it easier to get utility data into the platform? How do people directly input their billing data into the platform? We're looking for connections to solution providers. So we're about to sign 2 MOUs right now with Canadian Infrastructure Bank financing providers, so that hopefully will be seen as a resource that you can take your decarbonization scorecard to one of these providers and you know, start that funding conversation. Continuing to improve on our audits at scale, and then something that's really unique to our program that we're having to wrestle with this year and next is how do we run a unified provincial program where some of our members are now adding mandatory compliance programs where they're going to start requiring building energy benchmarking in the context of other partners who have voluntary programs. And so, you know, we're working on how do we manage that with some of our partners who are moving to mandatory benchmarking programs. So we're adding compliance modules and document storage that will allow for that to happen as well too. So with that, I will just leave my contact information there briefly for you. And I think we're going to another question and answer period. Is that right, Desi?
Yes, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Dave, for your presentations. Yes, we are going to a Q&A, but at the same time, I actually wanted to invite for some roundtable and updates from some of our municipalities, because actually the results from the poll show that there are 6 municipalities that are in the stage of implementing, 3 are in the council direction, and 1 there's no discussion yet. Feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A box, but at this point I would invite Mary, if that's okay, to like share your updates on Ottawa and the benchmarking initiatives there.
Sure, thanks, Desi. Great presentations, super familiar with OpenTech because the City of Ottawa is using OpenTech and works closely with Dave and team. It's phenomenal. Can't say enough good things about it. The City of Ottawa has just wrapped up year 1 of the voluntary benchmarking program. And really, we try to do exactly what Jeff was talking about, try to eliminate that confusion in the marketplace and say, meet your regulatory requirement. And when you're done, it's actually 5 to 15 more minutes of reading terms and conditions, because the difference is our information will be publicly available in the City of Ottawa, and then kind of hitting a checkbox so that through Portfolio Manager, it can come straight to us in through OpenTech, and then we can use that. We did put in a lot of additional benefits of like training elements so that people who are benchmarking get quite a bit out of it. So yes, they get the insights reports from OpenTech. We're doing kind of overall comparisons. We're giving decarbonization pathway, high level by archetype, what it might be costing. And so we're just trying to give more tools and resources as we kind of get this peer network going, participants locally. Year 1 had maybe 350 participants or so of individual buildings. Some of those were City of Ottawa owned properties, because you should always lead by example and make sure that you're submitting your own information and working out the glitches first. But also there were some larger portfolios, and there were quite a few, there were some like individual condo buildings that wanted to participate. So quite the gamut in terms of participants. And we're looking to broaden it significantly this year. And we're certainly expecting that based off of preliminary conversations we've been having. It was shocking to me how few consultants knew that this was a regulatory requirement to be benchmarking. I didn't know, and I think that was, yes, so I didn't know what kind of knowledge gap there was, because I just know the rules and had been following them in my past life. Anyways, that's the City of Ottawa's main update. We're going to continue, and we've been working closely with other municipalities whenever they reach out and ask questions about our experience. We just say like, oh my gosh, OpenTech can solve your problems. And it's been really phenomenal for the city of Ottawa. So we just continue singing the praises.
Thanks, Mary, so much. I don't know if Jeff or Dave want to add something. But if not, I'm going to invite Nael Khalem, if you can provide an update from Durham. And I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name correctly.
No worries. Thanks, Daisy. Thanks, Dave, for the great overview. Sounds like there's a lot of overlap with the program that we're designing at the moment. Very excited to see all this momentum picking up in the benchmarking space. I was actually fortunate to work with OpenTech when I was working out in New West in BC, so very familiar with the program. In terms of our updates, we kicked off our project just about the end of last year with our consultant Introba in our partner organization Windfall. And our key program objectives similarly are also to build capacity and awareness among building owners around energy benchmarking, and ultimately to support and drive building energy retrofits. And we're just in the process of finalizing our program design. So we've been having stakeholder engagement sessions over the past few weeks. And in terms of our features, we're hoping to coordinate a community building challenge of sorts for commercial and municipal buildings. So just a way to demonstrate leadership and champion climate action. And similarly, we're also hoping to include a help center service of sorts to provide technical support for owners in getting their data uploaded onto Portfolio Manager, and also providing guidance around energy conservation. And related to the building challenge, we're also hoping to coordinate an annual recognition or awards event that celebrates achievements. Some of you might have heard about York Region's ClimateWise business peer network. So we're hoping to replicate something similar here. And ultimately, we're hoping to create this ecosystem that facilitates deep energy retrofits of commercial, residential, and institutional buildings. And so we have been having preliminary discussions around disclosure, such as a visualization or disclosure map, but we do recognize the very fragmented piecemeal approach that's happening across Ontario, particularly as it relates to benchmarking. So I personally do see the value of coordinating our efforts and would be interested in exploring potential collaboration opportunities.
Thank you, Neil. We will continue with the update from City of Toronto. Leonard and Devon, if you want to jump in.
Sounds great. Thanks, Desi. It's Devon Stops. So I wanted to first really focus on what we're trying to do on the bylaw side this year. So, as part of our net zero existing building strategy, we contemplated mandating, additional disclosure for that. So that's something I'm hoping, to really have a solid move forward in this year, where we're looking at requiring, through a bylaw, smaller buildings to report data similar to EWRB. I think that access to the detailed data is also critical for the larger buildings to be able to, produce useful benchmarking and suggestions and, some of the other tools. I think also in parallel, we're moving towards emissions performance requirements as well, and developing a bylaw that would, phase in, again, mandatory emissions performance requirements for buildings to help drive change. So, I think, it's really important to note that, I think all of these things are possible at a municipal level, and, we're moving towards implementing that now. So, that's really, really critical. And, when you talk about EWRB compliance as well, our compliance rates in the city have been really high. And that's in part because of all of the outreach and support we provide through our programs for reporters. Leonard, I don't know, do you want to jump in on anything on the single family home side on benchmarking?
Yeah, Thanks, Devin. Hi, everyone. So interestingly, on the single family side, there's been this quest to get the same kind of market forces that you see in the commercial side. And so a lot of programs, the HERD program, other programs have tried to get at those decision-making points of purchase, whether it's time of listing, time of sale, or perhaps time of rental. Most research shows that we're not affecting change at those juncture points, especially in a hot market like Toronto or Vancouver or someplace like that. So we're trying to figure out a way of, yes, doing all the same things, making the process easy, getting great access to data, providing some support to people who want to make change, but to also, have a program that impacts the market post benchmarking, post labeling. And that really, we've taken a market transformation approach, and as a program development, which really looks at trying to work upstream with trades, with manufacturers, groups like HRAI, and also trying to identify barriers within the market, or maybe even broader barriers. We can certainly deal with a lot of income and other social barriers as the same sort of thing. And you identify barriers and then you work to remove them with program implementation. So I think for us, one of the key things will be access to data. It's clearly an issue on the EWRB side, and it's an issue for us. The simplest thing that we would like is to get data directly from utilities. That will be a process, but it's something we're working towards. We'd also like to get data directly from Enercan, and initial conversations with them have shown that they're open to that. And then the last thing that I think is important for us is, from a residential perspective, we're not really starting at energy. We're going straight to carbon, and we want to put carbon. The label itself will be a carbon label. It will be focused on, the benefits of electrification right from the start. It's not going to take a balanced approach that says, oh yeah, you can save money by having a higher efficiency furnace or a higher efficiency heat pump. It's going to pick winners in some ways, because at a residential level, the sophistication isn't there for a more nuanced discussion. And I think one of the key things that we're dreaming of, will we get it? Will it be implementable? Is to have a kind of concierge support. Concierge meaning kind of two things. One, yeah, we'll help you, we'll carry your bags, we'll do that kind of thing, but we'll also open doors. We'll open doors to help people get the right contractors, to coordinate an integrated design approach, that kind of thing. So that's very big ambition and long term, but that's just kind of an update of where we are.
I'd flag too, maybe that, again, that we're looking at that, in terms of a voluntary program that transitions into a bylaw as well, right? So again, I think part of the focus today is that we can start mandating some of these things at a municipal level, and we should, and Toronto is, so.
The City of Ottawa is also working and kind of building up the case, and has council approval in theory to work on emissions performance standards. So that'll be coming later. So this is also, benchmarking is also part of preparing people for that future transition and giving them a couple more tools before they are faced with regulation.
I'm sort of curious to hear from you, municipalities who aren't maybe that far along in benchmarking, and get a sense of what that conversation's like.
You can raise a hand and then I'll try to unmute you, or you can respond in the chat for those municipalities. Okay, Jamie from City of London.
Anyways, thanks for the presentation you folks have done today. I think from our standpoint, energy benchmarking, be it for single family housing stock or for commercial buildings, it's always been on our wish list, but for the most part, I guess because, EWRB is in play for commercial buildings, and, BPS is there for municipal buildings. For the most part, we've just been kind of hoping that eventually something happens at the provincial level based on those two platforms. So we really, so it's definitely, we see great value in the data, and we really hope that at some point the data becomes useful. But I think what's really interesting with what, especially what's happened in BC, is that, I mean, it sounds like we've got the bones, but maybe there's an opportunity for once again a collection of Ontario municipalities to somehow take that data and make it easier for us to all sort of look at and manipulate. So,
Jamie, I guess that's, we've sort of seen that, and I mentioned, I think EWB is incredibly important, and we've been actively sort of following the conversations about how to make EWB more useful and functional, and a lot of, what we're, for a variety of reasons I won't get into, we see a pretty big gap between what EWB could be and what it is in the market, and whether the province, the appetite of the province to fill that gap, whether that's even appropriate for them to do some of this stuff is a big question mark. So that's sort of one point. And then another, I think there's a lot of municipalities like London, who are kind of in that boat. Maybe don't quite have the commitment, resources that Toronto or Ottawa have to jump on this right now, and are kind of hoping. I don't know if this is maybe too direct, but like what kind of model, like you sort of say something might come along, but are there other sort of like really practical barriers? Like, is it just money? Is it the procurement model? Just trying to get a sense of.
So I think from our standpoint, and once again, I think in London, we recognize we're fairly fortunate that, we actually have, we're actually pretty good in terms of having data, like utility data. So we're very unique in that we have address or parcel level data on electricity use from London Hydro. And for natural gas use, we have the usual postal code level data with the 5 and 25 rule applied. So once again, it's great for single family housing, not so good for commercial buildings. And then, with the BPS data, once again, BPS data is great in the sense that, it's very granular. You can get down and understanding what the energy use and emissions per square meter floor area are. I'm finding the EWRB data less useful. I mean, I can get a general sense of, for those that report, the range of efficiencies of buildings, but what it doesn't help us is it doesn't help us refine our community inventory in terms of, what percentage of our emissions and energy use are associated with commercial retail versus commercial office. It's not there yet. And I think some of that data is kind of deliberately hidden from us, in the sense that what we get as municipality is very sanitized, and we only get the per square meter floor area stuff. And what we don't get is like the totals that I think are being collected by the EWRB program, just not being shared with us.
Okay, great.
But in terms of what's stopping us, money, of course, is always, we only have a very, a limited budget. Like I say, we've got tens of thousands of dollars a year to spend on stuff. So we have to pick and choose wisely.
Yep. Okay, great. That's really helpful, Jamie. Thank you.
We are at the end of the official part, but if there is more willingness for discussion, we can stay on. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for being with us and sharing your time with us in this topic. We will be continuing our effort to support and I don't know, close the gap I did run the last poll, and you see the results right now. There is some willingness for municipalities. Contact us or Jeff or Dave, and we'll make this continuation of this talk to continue. I will stop at this point, and I don't know if either Dave, Jeff, or Gabby want to say something.
No,
I
I
would
mean,
just say,
yeah.
go ahead, Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say thank you. You know, I think it's early for us. It's a good early opportunity to start this conversation. I think everybody's thinking about it. You know, now's the right time to let people be aware that there's a whole community, I think, focused on this issue, and the more we can link these conversations up, the better. I know collaboration can be challenging with this many stakeholders at the table, but I think the impact potential, the end result is going to be much better if we take more of a collective approach.
Yeah, that's great, and you know, we're definitely here, keen to help out in any way we can, be a solutions provider. We definitely have seen the benefits of collaborating and operating, you know, programs at scale out here in British Columbia, and we even see it too in terms of like the opposite case in Alberta, where, you know, Edmonton and Calgary operate, you know, separate programs and that are aligned together. So, you know, really hoping that something can happen in Ontario, which you know, boosts the collective impact and value of all the programs that are being considered by you as local governments right now. So really, you know, happy to participate in any way we can and help out. And again, thanks for the opportunity to present to all of you today.
Thank you. Mary, do you have a last?
I do. It's just I came from working on like kind of national collaboration, and one of the restrictions we have in working just in the city of Ottawa is that peer-to-peer network is people are competing with each other also. So the bigger we can make this, if this is provincial and we're all sharing information as municipalities, the more, the richer those conversations and those peer-to-peer networks can become. Yes, they'll have different utility rates, different climate zones, but also some of those best practices and opportunities and like contractors that they'll be using will be so, I just think it'll make that more collaborative, richer, and more transparent as we work together. So I'm in favor of more a broader network. Bring it provincial, bring it national, more benchmarking.
Thanks, Marie. I don't know, Gabby, do you have anything to add?
No, actually, I think this was great. And I really want to thank Dave and Jeff and Marie and Lynn and Niall and Devin really for helping to provide those updates and showing and for the implementation that is taking place. And I think this is really important to be able to advance this within the commercial sector. Transparency, transparency, transparency. If there's only one thing that we can advance that'll help to change the system and overall ecosystem development of retrofit value proposition, it is transparency, transparency, transparency. Outside of regulations, of course, that would do too, but we'll start with the transparency. So I'm really glad that that there's a lot of momentum, and I was so pleased to see from across the different from the municipalities on the webinar today that there's a critical mass moving forward. So we're going to be sending out the recording of this as well, and we're going to be wanting to identify who are the folks who we should be gathering together to advance this conversation so that we can move forward on identifying what we do in Ontario, because we definitely need to put some flesh on our very scrawny Ontario skeleton right now. And there's a lot of room for improvements. And if we all work together, we will achieve a hell of a lot more than we will working in isolation. So I want to really give a shout out to Jeff and Dave for kicking this off, and for all the municipalities providing all the updates. If there's any additional updates from your municipality, if you can share it with us by email, just by sending it to Desi, that would be great. We will add it to the meeting notes and really set the lay of the land for where we are right now and where municipalities want and the Race to Reduce want to go next. And thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.